Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories. Let us never tolerate outrageous conspiracy theories.
A few minutes after an airplane crashed into the World Trade Center on September 11th, television shows were interrupted to provide us with news reports. But these news reports were repeated over and over, day after day, without interruption.
And show it to you again.
We were told that Osama was responsible, and his photo was shown to us over and over. But how could a few men defeat our air defense system, and with 4 different airplanes? We were told that fire caused the towers and Building 7 to disintegrate.
Show it to you again.
But fire had never caused a steel building to disintegrate before, so how did fire do it to 3 buildings on September 11th? And why didn't they show the collapse of Building 7 over and over? Why were some events repeated endlessly while others were ignored? Well, at least the FBI solved the crime within a few days and released the names and photos of the 19 hijackers. Unfortunately, news reports were soon complaining that some of these hijackers were alive. Has this crime really been solved?
Thanks for tuning into the program. You're watching the Connie Bryan Show, and tonight I have a very special episode to bring you. So if possible, please gather your family around the television because you don't want to miss this episode tonight. I've got a very special author who lives in Santa Barbara who wrote a book about 911 called Painful Questions, who's agreed to come on the program with me, and so I'm very honored to have Eric Schmidt with me here in the studio.
Well, it's great to have a little exposure here in Santa Barbara.
I am just thrilled because for some time I have wanted to get an author on the program. I was hoping I might could get David Ray Griffin. I heard you on George Norrie's show, Coast to Coast. And
yeah, of course, they were just trying to criticize.
They were just trying to. I wanted to scream because that's right. They were. He wasn't letting you really explain yourself like I'm going to in this full hour tonight. It's going to be devoted to this topic because, as you were just saying before we rolled tape, there's so much secrecy surrounding this issue. And let me just ask you before we do the little quiz for the viewers, why do you think it is that the majority of Americans have such a hard time digesting this information?
Well, there's 2 problems. One is that a lot of the information never made it out. A lot of the information like that's in my book never made it out to the public. Mm-hmm. The ordinary media people like KEYT or the news press, all they provide you with mainly is Hollywood gossip and right. A few simple crimes. They don't go into the details. They don't show what really happened.
Right.
And then if they do go into it, if anyone does, it upsets people.
And that's
so
what I'm
much.
asking. What do you think it is that upsets people, that causes them to put up a wall? I've run into this when I try to explain to people the holes that we find so readily in the story we've been told that indicates that it's probably an inside job what happened on 9/11. Why is it that people just glaze over and they're resistant to the information?
It's hard to figure this out. It seems to be a personality thing. When I look at who can deal with it and who can't, it seems to be personality rather than education or intelligence. Or
do you think it also could be that as you digest this, you can't help but realize what we're going to share tonight does show that the story we've been told is wrong. So when you come to that conclusion, you're forced to accept the fact that our country is extraordinarily...
Well, it's like a corrupt... There's a corrupt gang within our government, like a fungus.
Thank you. In other words, you're forced to accept that. You're forced to face something that is very
unpleasant.
Very unpleasant, very scary. Let's get right to the quiz for everyone. And of course, that would be when you ask folks on the street. If I were to ask my viewers right now, look at the model here on the desk. Regarding the World Trade Center on 9/11, how many buildings fell? What's the answer that most people give, Eric?
2.
2. They say 2, right? Our cameraman just said 2. That's not true. 3 buildings fell. You want to take it from there?
Yeah, the third one is not showing in this model. It's about the height of this DVD, right about this location. It's called Building 7. It's part of the complex, but it's across the street from this building, which is building number 6, and it collapsed about 5:30 in the evening. And it's 47 stories. It's a steel-framed building. It was shown on television perhaps once or twice. A few people saw it, but most of the media ignored it. Most people don't even know it.
No plane crashed into building number 7. 2 planes, of course, one each hit the towers, and that's the reason that everybody just accepts that the towers just fell down like they were a house of cards, basically. Could you take on that topic? Never before in the history of architecture has a steel building come down for fire.
And Fire Engineering Magazine wrote about this, in fact. They were even, in January of 2002, the Fire Engineering Magazine, which goes out to fire departments, was complaining about, you don't have steel buildings falling down from fire. Plus, they were complaining that they were throwing the rubble away. They're selling it as scrap metal to China and North Korea, and they said, you can't do that either. So we've got them complaining that fire doesn't bring steel buildings down. You're not allowed to destroy the rubble. They're violating the law. People don't know that either.
Right. And a lot of people are probably wondering, what's he talking about? They cleaned up the evidence so fast that nobody can go in. No experts can go in.
No, you're right. After the buildings fell down, this was a crime scene. The police should have roped it off and said, stay away, because we've got to inspect it. We've got to get photographs. Right. Then we've got to look at, why did these buildings fall down? If they fell down because of fire, especially Building 7, which was not hit by an airplane,
Everybody who works in a steel building would be very
you'd
concerned.
be terrified. You think, what's going to happen to my building? If Building 7 can fall down for no apparent reason, we ought to look at what was wrong here. Who designed this building? But they didn't. They just picked the rubble up, sold it as scrap metal, and meanwhile we got Fire Engineering Magazine saying, stop it, this is against the law. And they're saying, please send messages to your congressman and tell them to stop. They're just ignored.
Okay, so Building 7 comes down around 5 in the afternoon.
5:30, it just drops.
It drops.
And then just completely pulverizes itself. It doesn't just break into a couple pieces. It's completely pulverized.
So now, for a few minutes here, and we do want to keep this succinct and move along quickly because there's so much information, but I do think we need to take a few minutes and talk about this issue of how the buildings came down, because that is one of the most compelling areas to show that this is wrong, what we've been told.
Right. The best thing is to watch the video of Building 7 come down. When you see this building drop,
we'll show that.
It looks exactly like a demolition of an old office building. It's got the telltale signs of dust, little bits of dust coming out at the corners and the windows. And it's got the dust at the bottom, at the base of the building.
It comes straight down into its own footprint. Which is
yes.
exactly... The middle comes in, the sides come falling in.
Right, the inside of the building fell first. You can see the very top part, at the top of the building that had some air conditioning and other equipment, that fell inside the building first. And so what the inside of the building gets sucked in, the outside fell on top of it. And if you look at the rubble and the photographs, after this building fell, you look at the rubble, you can see the outside of the building has fallen on top of the rubble. And this is exactly what controlled demolitions do.
They're designed to do that. They're designed to, there's a company that actually brags about the fact that it'll make your building come down with the steel cut such that, broken such that it'll fit on your truck.
Yeah, they've gotten it down, it's perfected. So that when you bring a steel building down, or any office building, they'll bring it down without bothering the neighboring buildings, and all of it's in nice little pieces.
Right. And so I'm glad you discussed that about Building 7, but if we could back up and let the viewers know about how before 7 fell, the World Trade Center the other 2 buildings, the tallest 2, the North and South Tower, came down the same way, pretty much the same way.
They were similar, except that they were coming down, they started, like the North Tower started about higher up, and the South Tower was a little bit lower down, but they both have the same characteristic of
coming down into their own footprints.
Right, and most important is when they finally hit the ground, there are no pieces left of the building. There's nothing but steel, individual
and the steel
pieces.
is all broken, as opposed to, like in David Ray Griffin's book, he makes a point of saying those core columns. Those 47 core columns in the center, not the side columns that go up the building, but the center core columns were massive, and they should have been sticking up still.
Right, they're not only massive, but every floor is a mesh of steel. So you've got steel running up and down, and then you've got a mesh of steel on every single floor
So
And
where
so,
was the, yeah.
So how does the building? It's a three-dimensional mesh. If you took away all the windows and all the carpeting and even all the concrete, you got a three-dimensional mesh of steel. And how does that just all of a sudden crumble into little pieces? And the firemen, when they went through looking for people, were making remarks like, I didn't find a computer. I didn't see a telephone. Everything was shredded. Everything was pulverized. They're making remarks. I never saw anything like this. And how does that happen? There weren't even any pieces of flooring material. Now, if a building were to fall down like that, you'd expect pieces, and it might be twisted, it might be bent, but you'd find pieces of stairways, pieces of elevator, you'd find crushed computers,
right.
You'd find maybe a crushed body and pieces. They didn't find anything except little bits.
Well, some of the most damning evidence that the story we've been told is false is they try to say the pancake theory is what happened. Could you describe that?
The official story is that when the planes hit, it broke some of the columns in the building. And so their theory is now the fires are burning there, and that caused the roof, the ceiling above it to crumble and to hit the floor below it. And then that cracked that floor, and then all those pieces went down and hit the floor below that, and that broke that floor. So that's the official theory, that it just went bang, bang, bang like a ball rolling down the stairs. Now that sounds sensible until you start asking yourself, well, wait a minute. If it takes 1 second to go bang to that floor and then 1 second here, or even a half a second. Let's take a half a second. There's 110 floors.
Well, it would certainly take longer than a half a second, but let's go with half a second.
Let's say a half a second. That's 55 seconds. But you watch the video, you look at the seismic data, it was less than 10.
Less than 10
seconds. That's 10 floors. That's an average of 10 floors per second.
Now, this is an area that's so important for the viewers to get, because when I really digested that and understood that, that was such a powerful piece of evidence to show that something's wrong here, and that is that's free fall speed.
Yes, this is what most people don't understand. These towers are so big. If you were to go at the top of these buildings and then throw a rock over, just drop it, it would take about 8.4 seconds to hit down at the bottom. You look at the North Tower seismic data, the structure broke apart in about 8.4 seconds.
Yeah.
It was breaking at free fall speeds.
That is the trademark of what happens in a controlled demolition. It comes down free fall speed, and we'll show video of this right now. When the building's coming down, you talk about this in your book and in your video, the powder, the dust coming out in horizontal, as we can see here. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and on the free fall speed, that's the physics professor is now verifying this for us. That's another thing that people really need to understand. This physics professor in Brigham Young University and his class looked into this issue, and they said the same exact thing. They're verifying everything that we've been saying all this time, that you cannot have pieces of concrete crashing through steel and concrete floors as fast as they fall through the air. It's physically impossible. Right. And so he's verifying it. And then when you look at how the buildings came down, if you look at the photographs, a building is mostly empty air. So if the ceiling above us were to fall down, it would swirl the air around, it'd be blowing around, but most of it's just air. It just swirls around, and then most of that would swirl around the floor below it. But what we see when these buildings were falling, so-called falling, dust is just flying out the windows, horizontally hundreds of feet, and there's no corresponding swirling back. Mm-hmm. And so when a floor falls, it's true, it will push air outward, but at the same time, it's creating a vacuum above it. So there should be a swirl back up. There's no swirl. It's just outward, constantly outward.
You see the puffs of dust coming out each floor.
We made it at least 2 blocks, and we started running, floor by floor, instead of popping out.
It was if they had detonated.
Detonated.
If they were planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
All the way down. I was watching it and running.
And then you even see on the part of the South Tower that tipped slightly, You even see, as you pointed out to me earlier, that it's coming, as it's falling, it's disintegrating.
Right, the
section.
entire top section of this south tower cracked, started to fall over, but as it's falling, you can see it turning into dust. Now, how does a piece of building, as it's falling down in the air, turn into dust?
Only if it's being demolished. And you can see, it appears in the video that it is coming up from the bottom, blowing,
right,
exploding. Also, you point out in your book that where is it? Where's that section? If it fell like that off the building, it should have crashed onto...
It was hitting this building, number 4. It broke this direction, and so it's this building, this part that broke off would be bigger than anything within Santa Barbara. It would be massive. If you were to take that part that fell off and lay it here in Santa Barbara, it would be towering above everything.
Right.
It's monstrous. And this thing started to fall. It broke, started to fall down, but as it goes down, it disappears. And then you look at building 4 underneath it, all you find is pieces of steel.
And building 4 and these other buildings, these small buildings down here, never fell. None of these buildings ever collapsed like that.
No. This building got crushed a little bit. But when you look at the rubble, that's the other thing that's mysterious about this. There's nothing but pieces of steel. It looks like it went through a shredding machine.
A shredding machine. There should have been much larger pieces, too, than what we find there. Am I correct on that?
Yeah.
It should have been. And I think our cameraman has a question.
Yeah. Did anybody, speaking of the rubble and anything, did anybody check for anything besides what you would get, residue from the burning fuel, such as explosive?
Okay, he's asking, did anybody test for residue of fuel?
This is what Fire Engineering Magazine was complaining about. They said, you cannot touch that rubble. Stop selling it as scrap. As soon as these towers fell.
They were selling it as scrap.
That day, they were there pulling the rubble up on the grounds that they were trying to look for people. But they weren't just picking it up and moving it to the side as they were looking for people.
But you think they would save it and be able to take it to
It was against the law to do anything else. You have to save it.
You would save it and take it to a place where it could be analyzed.
But that's right.
But that's not the case.
They didn't do it.
They sold it for scrap.
And not just for scrap, but to other countries like China and North Korea, where how are you going to look there? You see, this was what you call a violation of our own laws. They know it. The police know it. The FBI knows it. The government knows it. You had Fire Engineering Magazine complaining about it. They all know it was illegal.
However, if they were trying to cover up something, they would have to do that.
They would have to, because as soon as someone looked at that, they'd say, wait a minute, this building didn't just fall down. There's evidence everywhere of explosives.
And yet the few, I understand, engineers and scientists who they did allow were volunteer part-time people.
Well, that's the other thing that's mysterious. The government, as soon as this collapsed, said, oh, we'll look into it, don't worry. But they didn't provide any money. They weren't helping. There were calls going out, please, if there's any engineers that can help us. And they're like doing this on their spare time, hardly any money. They spent more money investigating Bill Clinton and Monica Lewinsky. And this is a major crime, and they don't care.
There was a great deal of resistance, not to get into theories of who exactly is behind this tonight. That's not our purpose, but I will say that there was a great deal of resistance by the Bush administration to any kind of investigation into this.
Yes.
So that was interesting. But again, I wanted to mention, like you said, if there should have been a much bigger pile of debris. That debris should have been preserved. The whole section that tilted, that we can see appears to be being demolished as it's coming down, it was non-existent on the scene. And also the wrong tower. I'm using some terminology again from David Ray Griffin's book. I know he won't mind. The wrong tower, he says, fell first. Could you go into that?
Well, the north tower, the one with the antenna, was hit first by the airplane. The airplane crashes into it. About 15 minutes later, the south tower is hit. And then about 56 minutes after the south tower gets hit, it just crumbles into dust.
And it wasn't even the first one that had the most damage.
No, it was the one the plane hit from the side. Most of the fuel burned out here on the side, making a spectacular fireball.
I want the folks out there to understand what you're saying. It is common understanding. This is a fact, indisputable fact that the North Tower had a lot more fires and damage than the South Tower did.
Right.
So even if you buy this bit about that the fires are what brought the building down, how do you explain, like you said, that there was minimal fire damage from the angle the plane hit the South Tower, yet it came down first?
Right, and well, it's also even worse than that, because it turns out later they were hiding the radio transmissions of the firemen. As the firemen were climbing up the stairs here, they were sending reports on their radio to their station, to tell them what's going on. And they were up in the fire zone of both towers. They're walking around up there, sending back reports. And in the south tower, they're saying, oh, there's only a few fires. And it matches exactly what the photographs show. The fires were only on the one side of the building where the plane hit. There were no fires on the other side. The fires never went from one side of the building to the other.
Now, can fire create the kind of temperatures necessary to cause a steel structure building? I know this is kind of what we talked about a little earlier.
Yeah, well, this is one of the other problems most people have. They think, well, jet fuel was burning. Well, jet fuel is a hydrocarbon like gasoline.
A hydrocarbon.
It doesn't have any magic properties. It's like diesel fuel or gasoline or candle wax or the stove, your butane or natural gas stove. It doesn't burn any hotter than these other hydrocarbons. And they cannot melt steel. If they could melt steel with it, they would have done it hundreds of years ago.
Right. So the fires were short-lived in the building, and we can show that picture of the black hole that shows no fires, and there's a woman and appearing to look out.
The fires were so small, and this is another thing people have to realize. These buildings are steel. The frame is steel. These are not wooden buildings. These are steel frames, and the flooring has got concrete. It's a steel corrugated steel pan on top of a steel floor, and there's concrete on it. There's nothing inside this building that can burn except carpeting, some office furnishing, and some paper.
And it's exhibited by the fact that the firemen ran into the building because they didn't expect it. The rescuers believed that this will be okay. We're going to go up and we're going to help people. We're not really in a dangerous situation.
No steel building has ever fallen down from fire. They've never even cracked into two pieces. It's impossible. If you design them properly, they don't fall down from fire. So the firemen went running up there, and they actually made it to the fire zone of both towers, which is a sign, if they're walking around in there, how hot could it possibly be?
Right.
It couldn't have been more than a warm summer day.
And again, I refer to that picture that you have in your book that's so amazing of the area where the jet crashed. It's now black. There's no fires raging. And here's a woman
who walks over here to look out the window.
Here she is peering out the window.
Or out the hole, I guess you'd call it. The hole by the engine. So people are walking around in there. There's a couple of them that had even passed through. They were in the above the fire zone. They went down the stairways. Now, if this was such an inferno, how are people walking around? How are firemen walking around? And why don't the photographs show the fires? When you look at the photos, all you see is black smoke.
Yeah.
You don't see flames. And then you compare that to the fire in Madrid, Spain, that just occurred not that long ago, in February, I think it was. That thing, the whole building looked like a torch after a while. It was burning almost the entire night. And it stood there, like you'd expect. It burned out.
And that is because, that's the question I was asking, because fire doesn't create that kind of heat to bring the steel.
Fire cannot bring down a steel building or a concrete building. It could bring down a house because the house is wood.
Now, folks are thinking, some folks out there who may be skeptical are thinking, yeah, well, the building came down, and I believe that there was some physics involved in creating that kind of heat. Okay, well, talk about that, how that heat could have happened.
The problem with the heat theory is there is nothing inside the building to burn. The hydrocarbons like the jet fuel, most of that burned off in the beginning.
And I'm talking explosives.
Yeah, the only thing that can create the kind of, to bring down a building like this, especially when everything is broken at the joints, because this is the other thing about it. The building, you have to look at the rubble. The entire structure, both of them, all the way into the basements,
were neatly...
All of it. All floors, even down to the very, very bottom in the basements, the entire steel structure was just pulverized.
Pulverized the same way Building 7 was found as it came straight down into its own footprint.
Yeah, and so let's assume there is a fire here and a fire here. How does that go all the way down into the basement? And not just crack a few building parts, but it breaks every joint. There's thousands of joints here. Right. And then it does it in less than 10 seconds.
So the hot spots that they found and the heat temperatures that I'm referring to could happen from explosives only.
Yeah, you're referring to the temperatures after the towers fell. 5 days later, NASA sent an airplane flying over the area and was reading the temperatures by reading the infrared radiation that was coming from the rubble at this point. Okay. 5 days later, they are measuring spots in the rubble that's hot enough to melt aluminum. This is like 1,300 degrees. at the South Tower and at Building 7. Now, you got to think about this. The towers fall down. The firemen go out there. They're spraying water on it. There was a few days of misting, rain. 5 days later, the top of the rubble is at the melting point of aluminum in a few spots. Now, how does a building fall down? 5 days later, you put aluminum on it and it melts. I mean, where does this
What's
heat
your
come from?
explanation for that?
There's only one way you can explain it. These things were brought down with explosives. There was a lot of heat in here from all the explosives. They may have had thermite too in here to help for some reason or another.
We were the first ones in the second tower after the plane struck. I was taking firefighters up in the elevator to the 24th floor to get in position to evacuate workers. On the last trip up, a bomb went off. We think there was bombs set in the building.
We don't know exactly what they did, but it's a sign of explosives when you have this kind of temperature.
And you're talking about physics right now.
Yes, and the physics professors was looking at this too.
I'll read a little bit of that. I'm glad you brought it up. This is the Brigham Young
Yes, the Brigham
physics
Young
professor. His name is Stephen Jones, and I'll read his quote. He says, "It is quite plausible that explosives were pre-planted in all 3 World Trade Center buildings, which were actually a diversion tactic. The planes hitting the building, he believes, were a diversion tactic."
It caught your attention, especially the one that hit the South Tower with that big Hollywood-style fireball.
He's looked into this, and I think we're going to start, folks, hearing from more experts soon.
Well, that's another good point.
this.
See, when I first came out with my book, this was in 2002, and of course I get ridiculed for being a conspiracy nut. Well, you know, it's been years. Every time people look into my book, they either become totally silent or they join with us. We're not losing support.
You're not losing support.
We
You're
are
actually
gaining it, and it's going worldwide. It's even, stuff is getting translated. Like right now, I even have my DVD translated. It's in German. Someone decided to turn it into German. And I got my book in German. And there's
Your book's available on Amazon?
Right, and just at my own website. But this is an important point. If I was wrong all this time, and other people were wrong, why are we growing in support?
Right.
Every time people look, they either become quiet and go back into their room and, like basically a dog with his tail between his legs, or they join with us.
Right. We want to get to the Pentagon. I want to get to also the air defense intercept problem, which folks who read David Ray Griffin's book said that was the most compelling area for them, was the air defense, why they didn't intercept. I want to get to that too. But before we get to those 2 areas, Building 7 and Silverstein, his quote in which he said on a PBS program, they just decided to pull it.
Well, yeah, he made this very bizarre quote, which he was saying, I got a call from the fire department commander telling me they were not sure they would be able to contain the fires in Building 7.
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
And I said, we've had such a terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
Could you just explain to everyone what that term means? It's slang.
Well, the demolition companies will use it to mean demolish the building or pull it down in some way.
The term is known
destroy the building
as a slang term, and he actually used it
to destroy.
In the context of his statement, there's no question. The context is that when he says they made the decision to pull it, he's talking about Building 7.
Yes.
And I know you've said that some people want to try to say he's talking about pulling out the battalion, but that doesn't fit the context of how he's speaking there.
Even if they're pulling out the battalion, it doesn't make sense to say, because replace it with battalion. And they made that decision to pull out the battalion, and then we watched the building collapse. I mean, that doesn't follow.
How do they know the building's going to collapse?
That's right. It's a steel frame building. Nothing he says makes any sense.
And it wasn't hit by a plane. Building 7 was not hit by a plane. It had very little fire damage.
It had only a couple tiny little fires. And people have to picture this in Santa Barbara, a 47-story building. Picture this in Santa Barbara, 47 stories, practically 600 feet.
Right.
Imagine this thing got a couple tiny little fires, in the lower floors, and then you're watching it, and 10 seconds, poof, it's down, and it's nothing but pulverized pieces of steel and dust. And then imagine KEYT and news press, all they have is one little blurb. Oh, the tallest building anywhere in the area just fell down. And on to the weather now.
Yeah, why was it that the media showed us buildings, the North and South Tower, but didn't show us Building 7 falling down all the time? They showed us constantly North and South Tower falling.
Well, they mostly showed the tower being hit. They didn't even show a lot of the tower falling, but they show mostly the tower being hit, which shocks everybody. They won't even talk much about Building 7. And then the government's the same way. So the government said after these buildings fell down, they said, well, we'll investigate. Mm-hmm. Okay, after 7 months of investigating, FEMA in their report says, well, we don't know what happened to Building 7.
We don't know what happened to Building 7.
And then the next report,
that's what FEMA said.
Their commission report didn't even mention Building 7. So we've got a building, 47 stories, it just pulverizes itself. The government's, I don't see anything.
Right.
And the news people, what is wrong with these people?
Again, I'd like to read a little bit of what the physics professor from Brigham Young says. He says, previous investigations, including those of FEMA, since you brought up FEMA, and their investigation, and the 911 Commission, and the National Institutes of Standards and Technology, he says they all ignore the physics and chemistry of what happened on September 11th to the Twin Towers and the 47-story building known as number 7. He says the official explanation that fires cause structural damage that caused the buildings to collapse cannot be backed up by either testing or history. So hopefully we'll get some more experts coming out here shortly that are willing to put their names out there and not be afraid to buck the resistance to this.
Yeah, because because like I said, as people look into it, they become on our side.
Right.
And so it's growing, and the government can't stop it. And KEYT can hide all they want, but this is coming out eventually. And eventually people are going to start asking, why are they covering this up? This is a major crime. And then it gets worse, because when you realize when these towers came down, those clouds of dust, remember those things?
Right.
A lot of people say, well, they were dust. They weren't dust, like the stuff that falls on your kitchen table. It was pulverized buildings, pulverized windows, pulverized computers, pulverized fluorescent light bulbs. There are right now still tremendous health problems from breathing it, getting it in your eyes, your skin. There are skin rashes. Mm-hmm. There are people with lung problems now, right. Kidney problems, liver problems. That was demolition debris. It was not dust. And they are suffering over there from it.
Now, one last thing before we move to the Pentagon, and that is back to Silverstein's comments. When I heard those, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. And I think out of all the evidence that we have for most folks who are coming to grips with this, that's one of the biggest things is when they hear Silverstein admitting to pulling the building. That indicates that they would have to have pre-planted demolition explosives. They could, in other words, what I'm saying, you can take it from here, but they can't do it that fast. They can't have...
His statement, you cannot take his statement literally because it doesn't make sense. He's trying to imply, no matter how you interpret his statement, it means nothing.
Well, at least it means that if they did a demolition, it had to already be set up for that.
That's the only way you can interpret it. But you see, he's trying to make this sound like the fire department made the decision that day.
That doesn't make sense.
See, that's what I mean. His statement, by the way it reads, you cannot interpret it to make sense. What should have happened is the government should have said, bring these people in so we can talk to them. What is going on with Silverstein in the fire department? Nobody asked them anything.
They didn't do that in the commission?
Nobody asked them anything. And where are these investigative
reporters? They didn't bring him in and say, what are you talking about on PBS?
Right.
I remember getting a call from the fire department commander telling me that they were not sure they were going to be able to contain the fire. And I said, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull, and then we watched the building collapse.
They ignore it. They ignore it. Plus, then he says to the insurance company, I want $800 million for Building 7 falling down. They've already, I know they gave him about half that,
These buildings were owned by us, the taxpayers.
Well, the two towers.
The two towers were owned by the taxpayers.
He already had Building 7.
And he had a lease for the two towers.
Yes, and he had an insurance policy, so he gets about $4 billion.
But why does he get the payoff from the insurance company because he has a lease, when they're built and owned by the taxpayer.
But see, no one asks these questions except us. The government doesn't ask what's going on. The investigative reporters don't ask. There are so many weird things about this.
Right.
This is what I think scares people. When you look at this, you look at the murders that went on, the people that are in New York right now suffering. Some firemen just recently died from breathing that dust. It took this long.
And you talk about in your book about the fact that there was a desire amongst New York officials and New York citizens. I don't want to say this wrong. There was an animosity toward the buildings.
A lot of people didn't like them. The way they look, and they weren't very profitable. So a lot of people wanted just to get rid of them.
Wanted to get rid of them.
And the government actually looked into, well, how much would it cost to demolish those buildings? And they discovered it would cost a lot because they first had to pull out the asbestos.
So there were actually efforts looking into
how to demolish it. Right. This is the other funny thing. They looked into it. They looked at the cost of demolishing it. It was just not that long before these towers fell down. And so here we got the government trying to get rid of them. People want to get rid of them. Well,
I think people are about ready to freak out in our viewership, so we better move to another topic because this is so much to grasp about all this, and I think we did pretty good to get that much out there so quickly in our time slots, so time allowed. So let's move to the Pentagon. Was there wreckage of the 757 found?
Yeah, now this is another one. The Pentagon was supposed to be hit by a large commercial airplane, Flight 77. Now, the problem with this is you've got this airplane. It was flying all the way over by Ohio when it finally disappeared. Indianapolis, the air controllers at Indianapolis had the last communication with it.
By Ohio.
But it was by the Ohio area when suddenly the Indianapolis air controller tries to contact it and it doesn't respond. And they put out this signal, help, this plane's gone. All of a sudden the plane's missing.
Right.
And
now,
so
this was after they already knew about the other hijacked planes.
Well, from the controller's point of view, they didn't know about it yet. You know, it's
interesting.
Well, it's because, it takes time for things to get around. But see, this plane had just disappeared. So they sent out a call for help. So where's this plane?
Right.
And then about a half an hour to 45 minutes later.
They can't find it until it shows up all.
Yeah, all of a sudden, about a half an hour later, the radar operators at the Washington, D.C. area see this plane spiraling down.
Spiraling down from a higher altitude.
Yeah, from a high altitude, spiraling down, and the guy's saying, wow, it's so smooth.
Well, a 757 can't do that. That's what
they're looking. They're like, wow, this is so smooth. They got quotes. It's so smooth. What a pilot. And then it comes down to treetop level. It's knocking down light poles.
That's
and
impossible.
Then it crosses over the highway, drops down to grass level, and hits.
You can't take a 757 on a grass level, as you talk about in your book.
This is what pilots will say. They look at this and they think, this is impossible. A Boeing 757 is equivalent to a bus with wings. It's meant to transport people. It's extremely unmaneuverable.
Right.
It's not one of those trick biplanes that you can go circles and flips.
So it supposedly hits the Pentagon. The military's own account is it hits the Pentagon on the first floor, the ground floor.
It hits the first floor. The problem is the plane, the size of the plane, it's bigger than the first floor.
And we'll put up on screen the damage to the Pentagon, and you go into this a lot in your book about how the damage is insignificant compared to what should have been the case with a plane like this.
Yes, when the planes hit the South Tower and the North Tower, you can see, like the North Tower, you can just see this plane-shaped hole.
But this wasn't even a steel building. This was a concrete.
Yeah, it hits the building. You can't find a hole.
Plus, the roof is still standing.
Right. People don't know this. See, here's another thing most people don't know. They've seen pictures of that broken part of the building. That's not what happened. When this plane first crossed over that highway and then crashed, people on the highway stopped. Some of them had cameras, and they're taking pictures.
And it shows the roof of the Pentagon still intact.
The Pentagon was completely intact. There's nothing on the grass. There's nothing. There's no firemen yet.
To even show the jet coming in at grass level. There's no damage on the grass.
Yeah. There's no damage anywhere. There's just this little fire.
Right.
There's a couple broken windows. And then, about 20 minutes later, this portion of the Pentagon tips.
Okay. Now, a lot of folks should be thinking, if they're really on top of this, well, if a jet's coming in, a big, huge airliner like that, well, the Pentagon certainly has air defense. Why couldn't they have taken out this jet? So
well, that's where That's what it looks like it did happen. You see, if you were a terrorist and you wanted to hit the Pentagon, you'd do like the World War II kamikaze pilots. You'd be flying high, looking down out the window and saying, oh, there it is, and then dive into it.
You do the most damage by diving, but yet this particular impact...
this plane comes in low to the ground. And this might be because they had to evade the missile defense system that's built around this thing. Because if it came in high, it might have been shot down way in the air. So they had to bring it in low. And if we look closely at the photos that were taken by the security camera
we'll put those
at
up
the
right now.
Pentagon, you can see this little trail of white smoke and then this flash. And it looks like a missile
box, right? And there's a little box that blocks where the huge.
Well, here's the other thing that's people don't. You got to take this. You got to think seriously about this. There are security cameras all over this place.
So we should have had plenty of video.
Where's the video?
Many people asked, is this the only security camera that was on at the Pentagon? The Pentagon. This is the nerve center for the United States military, supposedly the most secure building in the country. And this is the only video footage that was available of the most heinous attack ever recorded at the Pentagon.
Why did they only give us a couple lousy, low-quality pictures?
And you see the plume of smoke that looks like it could be from a missile, but...
you can't see what it's hitting?
Now, you postulate that it very likely, and witnesses said it was a small craft, that it was a drone plane. In this picture, the little photographs, I swear I can see what looks like the top outline of a small, could be a drone with the smoke, as we can see, coming out the back.
Right.
Which could be a missile being, as you say, a missile being fired at it.
Right. The details we'll never know these details, but it does look, that's what it looks like. But what people need to be suspicious of is the newspaper reports even admit that immediately after this attack, the FBI goes running over to the hotel across the street and the gas station and takes away their security camera film.
Yeah, could you repeat?
And you got to think about this a minute. The Pentagon gets attacked. The FBI is running over to the hotel and the gas station and say, give us your security camera tapes. And they take them. Why did they take them? It doesn't belong to them.
No.
And then the Pentagon, their first reaction is, we have no video of it.
But
we don't know.
That was a very good vantage point. And
yes,
how did they know?
They know. The newspaper report in my book, I have the quote in my book, what these people were doing. It says, it's shocking that people could do this. It says, hotel employees sat watching the film in shock and horror several times before the FBI confiscated the video. I mean, so the hotel employees are like, oh, did you see that?
Yeah.
And what does the FBI do? Rushes in there, grabs it, and takes it.
Back to those photos again, because this is so important, and you talk about it in the video and the book. That little box that I was referring to, where you see the white plume of smoke, and then you see that little, it's like a switch box of some kind or whatever. There's some kind of a rectangular box in the way. There's no way that could be hiding a 757.
No.
And the military released these photos to say, here's the plane.
Yeah.
So I'm saying, folks, look at these pictures, look at these photos, and can you not see what appears to be the shadow of a small craft? You can see a tail portion, and it does appear to be the size, as you talk about, of a military drone, which could do the maneuver and could explain why they didn't see on radar such a large aircraft.
Right. A military drone like a Global Hawk, which is mostly, it's got a lot of carbon fiber, and it's not easy to pick up on radar anyway, and it's computer controlled, so that's why it can do those tricky maneuvers.
And they found a small, what appears to be a small...
Yeah, I have that engine on the back of my plane. They just found one little engine.
Which is the size of a small plane like that.
Yeah, and so all the evidence points to the fact that they're hiding a lot of information at that Pentagon. They're not telling us the truth. It was not Flight 77. They sent a dog in to look for the bodies from the passengers. The dog has a blank expression on every single photograph that was taken.
And I think the most damning evidence to show that the story we've been told about the Pentagon is false is the extent of the damage to the Pentagon. You can see the hole, the size. Like we already mentioned, the roof's still intact. That should not be the case if a big jet crashed in the side. Also, the fact that the gap is too narrow. And the damage of the floors behind it. Some of those floors are still standing. You know they should all have been taken out by a large jet. Right. And then last but not least, could you talk about the area the plane hit, the coincidence of...
Right. The Pentagon, they say, it's the biggest office building in the world. Like 20, 30,000 people working there. It's gigantic. But there was one little section they were redoing. They were renovating it. And by coincidence, this giant building, the plane decides to hit the spot that's empty.
It does this amazing maneuver, which a 757 really can't do. Experts have looked at this. And hits this on the bottom floor, comes in at treetop level, skimming across the grass, and hits the bottom floor of an area
that's empty.
Coincidentally is pretty much empty. Come on! Please!
Everything about the September 11th attack...
Something's really, really wrong here.
It's very wrong. And see, this is what I think scares people. It's like you're opening a door, and they're looking, and they see, it's hell, my God! And they shut it and run.
Okay. Now, moving on quickly, because we don't have a lot of time. Air Defense Intercept. We have a system, a protocol in place. It happens about 100 times a year that we have to scramble jets to go anytime we think a jet might be hijacked. And yet there was, how long a period of time, 30, 40 minutes or more, that we didn't have jets in the air?
Well, this is one of the big mysteries also, because there's an Air Force base right near the Washington, D.C. area to protect the Pentagon, and people are like, where are those planes?
Right.
Where are the planes that were supposed to protect New York? Well, it happens that there were exercises running that same morning in both the Washington area and around New York.
What kind of exercises?
Now, the military was running these exercises. They were going to have, and near the Pentagon, there was going to be a small plane crashing into a building down near the Pentagon. And near the New York area, there were up to maybe 5 exercises running.
What kind of exercises are you talking about?
Now, these are where the military is running an exercise of planes hijacked, or...
A hijacking of planes exercise was planned on September
that morning,
11th?
on that same morning. So here is how you can get people. They're always asking, well, why would the military go along with this?
This is too much of a coincidence. We have the thing happen on September 11th, and they had exercises that day.
This is how you confuse the military, because... You say, all you need is a few people in the military to be part of this whole crime network. You don't have to have the whole military. You just have a few, and you say to them, we got to test our forces. Let's assume, what if a plane gets hijacked and it runs into a building? Well, the military will say, okay, why not? So they'd scheduled maybe 5 or so of them.
So you're telling me that not only did they schedule exercises on the same day for hijacking planes...
The same morning.
In New York, the same morning that it actually happened on, but it's also exercises included the Pentagon as well?
Well, it wasn't going to hit the Pentagon. It was going to hit another building nearby.
Near the Pentagon.
But think about what this means to the Air Force defense system. When they first hear a report that a plane is coming to the Pentagon or Washington, D.C., they don't know where the plane is coming. They see a plane coming.
You have to assume the Pentagon or the White House is in jeopardy.
Yeah, but then someone says, yeah, but we're running an exercise. And see, this is a way to fool them. And there's quotes out there from some of the military commanders. When they first hear the report of a plane hijack, one of the military commanders is saying, is this part of the exercise or is this a screw-up? It throws them off for a while. And you only need a short period of time to throw them off. Right. Because then the planes have hit. Then it's too late. And see, some of the planes, they scrambled them in the wrong direction. And so these exercises, and you say to yourself, well, this is really strange. How could anyone schedule exercises like this? This also happened in the London train bombing, July 7th of 2005. You can watch this clip.
You're saying there were exercises on the day of the...
That morning, there is the British policeman on the BBC, I think it was the BBC television. You can watch it yourself on the internet. You don't even need the TV. He's saying, wow, this is really strange. We were running exercises where there was terrorists on planes with bombs. It was very similar to what actually happened. He didn't put it together. This is how you can get away with this, because you're tying up the whole security system, because when they hear a real report, they think, well, that's part of the exercise. Just ignore it. So it throws the whole military off. By the time they figure out what's happening, it's too late.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, just so folks know, I looked at the details on the numbers of this, and Flight 11 was in the air, controllers had been notified that it was hijacked 22 minutes before hitting the North Tower. And,
they knew it was hijacked.
Then Flight 175 that hit the South Tower was 16 more minutes. So the total number of minutes was 38 minutes. It doesn't take but like about a minute or so to get jets in the air.
Right, right. They knew these were hijacked, but you got to remember there's
fighter jets.
There's several different exercises running. So when the first reports come in, one commander might think, well, there's other exercises. What's he supposed to do? You know, his first reaction is, you know, these things don't happen very often. So his first reaction is it's an exercise. By the time they figure out, it's too late. So this is how you can get this done without a lot of people knowing about it.
You confuse them with that, and so that by the time they realize this is really happening, too much time has elapsed for them to
do anything.
To get a plane there, a fighter jet there, to try to distract them, to try to pull them away. Question from our cameraman.
Yeah, could it not be that the bad guys who they're working for, okay, could they not have gotten that information? Well, there's going to be exercise. It would be a good time to do it. Well, the military's planning to have an emergency exercise.
So he's asking if the bad guys would have possibly wanted to capitalize on the fact that since they knew there were exercises.
Now, this is a possibility, but that means they're looking at all the exercises and then planning an attack around it?
Or could it have been
See, do you see how hard that would be? That would be okay for maybe like the London train bombing. But here you've got an attack at the Pentagon, you got an attack in Washington, D.C. Mm-hmm. How often you're looking over all the exercises? It's still, that could happen, but it helps even better when somebody is in the military suggesting the exercises.
Since they may have had foreknowledge of this planned attack.
They had to.
And of course, in David Ray Griffin's book, the other author who is from Santa Barbara that I'm hoping to get on the program, his book, The 911 Commission Report, Omissions and Distortions, he talks about the fact that FBI agents reported foreknowledge of an attack planned on 9/11, and they didn't get anyone to listen to them. They even came to the commission and testified at the commission, and it wasn't in the report.
Well, this is a good point, because one of the reactions I get from people is, well, if this were true, someone would talk about it.
And they have been.
Well, duh. I mean, what do you think the book's about? And then you got FBI people talking about it. We are talking about it, but who reports it? Does KEYT? Does the news press? Does anybody? No, they ignore us.
I do.
They ignore us, and then you get this, well, if people would talk. Well, they are talking, and they have been talking.
And it is growing, and the word is getting out. So we have a couple of minutes left. Word is getting out. We are making some progress here. Another thing is the put options. I want to real quickly, in 30 seconds, can you address the put options that still have not been...
Right. Just before the attack, the few business days before this attack, people started putting, mysterious people, they won't tell us who, started betting that United Airlines stock and American Airlines and then Morgan Stanley, who has a lot of floors in these buildings, and some others, that their stock would drop.
World Trade Center.
Yeah, and they bet that the stocks would drop in price, and they made a lot of money from this. And some of them didn't even pick up their money. And so immediately people think, well, who were they? They must have known. And so immediately you see the Chicago Board of Exchanges and the Security and Exchange Commission, and in Japan and in Europe,
stonewalled it.
They all said first, we're going to investigate.
But then they didn't. And
the someone stopped it.
And the 911 Commission didn't even address it. There's so many. That's the reason why David Ray Griffin calls his book Omissions and Distortions, because there's so much omitted that we needed to hear about. So if we were to just touch on one part as we're running out of time on the theory behind all this.
Well, see, trying to figure out why people do this. These crimes are so big. You know, it's when you look back at like smaller organized crime, like Al Capone, and you start saying, why would they do this? Why would they do that? you can't always understand why. All you can say is when you look at a lot of these attacks, like the Northwoods document.
That's what I'd like to talk just quickly about that.
I have a little bit of that in the
I know, because there are people
edition.
out there still, after we've talked about all this, and they're thinking, this is so
wild.
implausible.
But in 1962, there was a document written. It's now been declassified, and this section is called Pretext to Justify U.S. Military Intervention in Cuba. They wanted to attack, some people, not all, some people wanted to attack Cuba, and they're thinking, how can we attack Cuba? Not enough people want to.
So this was when Kennedy was president, before he was assassinated?
And some people wanted to attack them.
This was called the Northwood document?
That's what yes, and now we refer to it as the Northwood document. And so they're thinking, how can we get people to want
to support an attack on Cuba?
And it has to be the military, the government, the people. And so one of their options, they had a whole bunch of these options. They had things like we could blow up a ship in Guantanamo Bay and then blame Cuba for it. But the one that's interesting is we could blow up a drone, or we could have a Cuban aircraft, something that looks like a Cuban aircraft attack a civilian airliner. But you see, what they're doing is they're trying to figure out how can we fake something, make it look like Cuba is attacking us, and then we can justify war. What is 9/11? The Arabs attack us. Now we have to go over there and kill them.
So it's real similar to the Northwood document, which was back in 1962, that actually said in print, suggested we could, if we wanted to, do a simulated...
Yeah, because it's difficult to get people to support a war.
A simulated aircraft-involved scenario in which we could make it look like Cuba was
in order to start a war, you've got to get people mad. They don't just do it for fun. Nobody wants to go to a war.
So this is not a new idea, is what I'm getting at.
It's not a new idea. And in fact, the Northwoods document is not even the first time a government has done this. And they said even Hitler did this. They said that Reichstag fire, somebody burned that on purpose. Then he said, oh, the communists did it.
All right.
This is a common technique.
I want to have you back on the show again. As I said, I hope I can get David Ray Griffin eventually. Everybody keep your fingers crossed. Anybody having questions, we're going to have Eric back on the show in the not-too-distant future. Email me with your questions, and I will ask him those questions on the next installment that we have Eric on, if you will come back.
Sure.
Thank you so much. Keep up the good work, Eric. You're a true patriot. You really are, and quite a leader. It's what we need right now, more people like you.
We need more people talking about it,
too. And thank you for watching. I know this has been difficult to watch, and we'll see you next week.
Yeah, where the fuck, what do we do? We made it outside, we made it about a block.
We made it at least 2 blocks, and we started running. Floor by floor, it started popping out.
It was if they had detonated.
Detonated.
They were planned to take down a building. Boom, 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 boom.
All the way down. I was watching it and running.
The entire building has just collapsed, as if a demolition team set off. When you see the old demolitions of these old buildings, it's folded down on itself, and it is not
10 o'clock Eastern Time this morning, just collapsing on itself. This is a place where thousands of people work. We have no idea what caused this. If you wish to bring anybody who's ever watched a building being demolished on purpose knows that if you're going to do this, you have to get at the under infrastructure of a building and bring it down.